Let me take this out. I'll just do it on here. Okay, so as you see, the mitzvah we're going to learn is the mitzvah of Orla. Right? We're still sticking with these agricultural mitzvot. And so they appear in Sefer HaChinuch as mitzvot number 246 and number 247. We will also do mitzvah number 251, which will be related sort of from the side that has to do with peyot, the corners, but not the corners of the field like we did with the halachot connected to peah, leaving the corners of one's field, but the corners of your hair. That you're not to shave the corners of your hair. They're also called peyot. I spoke about this last time and gave a couple of explanations why that may be, that the mitzvot of peyot, of leaving the corners of your field for the widow and the orphan, is a beautiful mitzvah, but perhaps we won't always remember to do that when we don't live in an agricultural society. So leaving the corners of our hair and the peah, the corners, and letting them grow, reminds us of that important value and that important mitzvah. Or that the Rambam writes that it has to do with distinguishing ourselves from idol worship. We'll give another explanation in this week's class, but the main focus will be on the mitzvah of Orla. So, as you see in the first source, the mitzvah of Orla is to not eat Orla. Now, what is Orla? That we not eat from the fruit of a tree during the time of its Orla, which is the first 3 years from which it's being planted. And then the same one as if you plant it from a sapling or a spring of a tree. It says 3 years shall be Orla for you, it shall not be eaten. It's off limits. Orla perhaps means covered or blocked, right? It's blocked from you. That fruit you're not permitted to eat during the first 3 years. Only in the fourth year can you begin to eat from it. And then there are certain rules in terms of the fourth year of what you're allowed to eat and how you're allowed to eat and when you're allowed to eat. And that's mitzvah number 247. In terms of the Sefer HaChinuch's understanding of mitzvah 246, he tells us, you see in the Hebrew, Mesharshe mitzvazu, the roots of this particular mitzvah. The roots of this particular mitzvah, I will write about, or he's already written, but mitzvot neta revi, the planting of the fourth year, and that's the next mitzvah, mitzvah 247. So we go down to mitzvah number 247, where he's going to first explain the significance of the fourth year. 246 is hold back, restrain for the first 3 years. Once you plant the tree, do not eat the fruits. And its accompanying mitzvah is, yes, there's now a positive mitzvah to eat it in the fourth year of its growth. So I've given you the English. The commandment of the fourth year is as follows. The fourth year plant is completely holy. It's special. Not only is it permitted to eat, but there's kedusha to it. It is that all fruits that come out of the tree in the fourth year from its planting are holy, meaning to say that they are eaten by the owners in Jerusalem, like the second tithe. This is already an interesting comparison, that you're not only permitted to eat the fourth year that fruit begins to grow, but it's connected to Maser Sheni. Maser Sheni, the second tithe, I've spoken about elsewhere, is this beautiful mitzvah, this beautiful idea that tithing we usually think of giving to someone else, giving to the Kohen, giving to the poor. The second tithe is for the owner, that every so often he has to take the tithe of his harvest and his fruits.
Is the tithe Meiser?
Yes, tithe is Meiser. I'm sorry. He has to Meiser he takes the Maser of what he would normally give to the poor or to someone else, and he takes it for himself. The only condition is he has to eat all of this stuff, or he has to sell it and take the equivalent in money, and he has to spend it in Yerushalayim. There's something quite spectacular about that. I think it teaches a fundamental concept of how we're supposed to look at mitzvot. Right? People sometimes think mitzvot are meant to be burdensome. They're meant to be a struggle, right? It's tough to be a Jew. I always look at Meiser Sheni as sort of a paradigm of what all mitzvot are really supposed to be, that they're really for our benefit. You take this fruit, you go to Yerushalayim, and you spend your time in Yerushalayim eating it. It's the modern day equivalent is if you live overseas or you live outside of Yerushalayim, you're commanded to come to Yerushalayim and enjoy yourself. Enjoy the fruits of your labor in Yerushalayim. The Sefer Chinuch goes on to say, well, this concept of Ma'aser Sheni, but now we see that it also applies to Orla and some other tithes as well, that the commandment is to eat in Yerushalayim, teaches us first that we should view mitzvot in a positive light, that God is not trying to punish us with mitzvot, but actually trying to reward us. Right? It's a wonderful, positive experience. But he also says that the experience of coming to Yerushalayim and spending time in Yerushalayim has an impact. Right? This is the place where people seeking deeper spiritual connections to God, people seeking places to learn Torah in a more intensive and in-depth environment. You come to Yerushalayim, it's going to have an impact on you. You're going to be surrounded by these type of people. I always said that for me, Yerushalayim has a higher percentage per capita of crazy people, and also the highest percentage per capita in the world of truly tzaddikim, people doing amazing, amazing things. So the Torah says you've got to come here. You've got to come here in a good mood, right? Enjoying and celebrating. Yerushalayim is meant to be a place where people rejoice. We come here for the holidays. We come here to celebrate our harvests. There is a Mishnah that says that you're not allowed to go over your books, your financial statements in Yerushalayim, because you have to be in a state of joy in Yerushalayim. And maybe the state of the books will not be so positive. And so that's one of the ideas of eating Orla, the fruit of the fourth year, specifically in Yerushalayim, is connected to all those other ideas of why it's maybe important and valuable to come to Yerushalayim. He offers us another explanation as well. As he continues, he says, they're eaten by the owners in Jerusalem, like the second tithe. And the pasuk says, and you shall plant any food tree, a ma'achal, and in the fourth year all its fruit shall be holy, for praising for the Lord. Meaning the purpose of this mitzvah, sort of piggybacking on what we've said already, is to praise God, is to see blessing in your life, is to have the proper motivation of thanking God. And so you do it in the fourth year because that's when those fruits will look most beautiful. Right? If you speak to farmers, they'll tell you fruit from the first year, the second year, the third year, very seldom they don't really grow that significantly. They don't look that impressive. And the Torah therefore wants to make sure that when you do come to praise God and you look at the material world and you're now going to connect it to the spiritual world, you look at the most beautiful of the material world you can see. We want you to come and praise God, but in order to help you get in the mood to praising God, you want to see that your harvest is quite beautiful and genuinely gives you a great degree of satisfaction. And so you can't do it in the first year. It just physically doesn't work that way. The fruits don't look that good. It's like when we pray for rain during the time when it's likely to rain. And similarly, we eat the fruit that's supposed to inspire our gratitude to God during the time when it's likely that the fruit will inspire that type of gratitude. And so that's, at least according to the Sefer Chinuch, the motivation for this mitzvah. The motivation is to wait into the time when it will actually appear quite beautifully and therefore inspire us. The concept of beauty, by the way, is often misunderstood in Judaism. You know, sometimes because of our conflict with Hellenism and the Greeks, we think that beauty is by definition bad, because the Greeks focused on beauty so significantly. But I would argue that the beauty the Greeks focused on was fairly superficial. And when done in the proper way, focusing on beauty actually can elevate through art, through beautiful music, through a beautiful view, a beautiful landscape, mountains, right? There's the famous story about Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who went on a vacation to the Alps. And his student says, is it appropriate for the Rebbe to go on a vacation? And Rav Hirsch says, what are you talking about? When I'm called up to heaven, God is going to ask me, what did you think of my Alps? Right? God created this beautiful world. To not appreciate it is an insult to God. And so he felt motivated to find the beauty in creation, because that's also finding the beauty in God, and also reminding us that God wants us to enjoy this world. So the Sefer Chinuch also quotes from the Ramban something similarly that says, if you look at the next paragraph, And Ramban wrote about the reason for the commandment on our verse, Vayikra 19:23. It's to honor God from the beginning of all our produce. Well, you may say, well, the beginning of our produce is the first year. No, the beginning of the beautiful produce that you'll see, praising the Lord. You want to really praise. The fruit is not fit to offer since it's meager, and also because the tree does not give a good taste or good fragrance into its fruit by that point in time. And because most trees do not put out fruit until the fourth year from their planting, so we should wait for all this. We should wait in order to see the beauty and appreciate it. Rabbi Cardozo, the next source, has a beautiful article in general about the importance of educating about music and art and beauty in our lives. He gives many reasons why and many sources why. It's a worthwhile article to look into. But for me, the most powerful line is what follows, where he says, natural beauty and music are there to disturb just as religion is to disturb. Right? You know, artists can't always explain their art, and people will experience really beautiful art, whether it's nature, you know, a gorgeous view, or an incredibly poignant piece of music or a piece of artwork. You don't always understand it, but sometimes it evokes an emotion in you when it's really good. And their purpose is to awaken in people the sense of wonder, right? Of going beyond yourself. That's what really beauty is meant to do. It's meant to inspire you and make you aware that there's a whole world out there that's beyond you, and inspire you to want to connect to something that is beyond you. While beauty, art, and music are there to facilitate that wonder, it's religion that teaches you how to respond to that wonder, about gratitude to God, about praise to God. As such, religion is a protest against taking the world for granted, right? Taking the world and just assuming everything is mundane. Everything's the same as it was yesterday. So when you see real beauty, it inspires you to appreciate and to be filled with wonder, which is a requirement of religion. And so that's the Sefer Chinuch's argument about what's really taking place here, is that we should see that mitzvot are positive, and then we should also see that it's only in the fourth year that the fruit is of such a level that it will inspire the appropriate appreciation and beauty that we ultimately need. So what I want to do now, that's the Sefer's explanation, is offer another explanation for this mitzvah Orla. And to do so, I want to actually look at a number of questions about this mitzvah and see if there's, you know, a global way of answering all these questions that might reveal something deeper about this particular mitzvah. Let me see where I want to begin. Okay, so if you start at Mishnah in Orla, I brought Mishnah's chapter 1, Mishnah 1 through 4, Aleph through Dalin. You see as follows. The reason why you're planting a tree is not for its fruit, but for a fence, to keep people out, or maybe even just the wood, so that you can use it for building in the future. But Tor Mina Orla, there you're not obligated for Orla. You don't have to wait. If it's going to be used for tree purposes, wood purposes, then you don't need to wait, even if it has fruit that grows on it. But it's only when you plant with the intention of eating it for fruit that it matters. So we see something that intention is important here, and we see that the fruit, right? The fruit itself is what's essential, and not the tree. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Afilu Amar Hapnimi L'Ma'achal V'Chitzoni L'Sayeg. Let's say you have a tree, and the outside of the tree is just used as the fence to keep people out, and the inside of the tree, the opposite. The inside is going to be used for food, and the inside is going to be used for a fence. So then you have to keep the orla on the inside. But since your intention when you planted it was not to eat the fruit on the inside, so then you can eat it even in the second or third year. It's not considered orla. You're allowed to eat it because it goes back to the intention of when you planted it, even if your intention changes. And so we see something very interesting here, that first of all, intention is important. What was your goal, your motivation in planting a tree? Was it for fruit? Then the laws of Orla apply, or was it for wood? The laws of Orla do not apply. So we see that intention matters in mitzvot. It's an idea that we've spoken about a lot, but it also begs the question, why is the intention at the moment of planting what counts? Why don't we say the intention at the moment of eating? Now that you're eating it as fruit, it should matter and you shouldn't be allowed to do Orla. Why is the focus on the time of the planting? That's one question. And we're going to repeat that question in different forms as we look at other Mishnayot. So, for example, if you look, I didn't bring Mishnah chapter 1, number 5, which I didn't bring. It's not in the sources. Describes a case of bending a vine. Right, there was a process where you would have a vine that grows from the ground, and it's been there, let's say, for 3 years. You're now permitted to eat from it in the 4th, and one of the processes, agricultural processes, with that people would bend it, and they would bend it back into the ground. And they would let it go underground for a while, and then it would come out elsewhere. So it would get additional nutrients from the ground, and it would come out elsewhere, and it looks like it's a brand new vine. Does Orla apply or not? And there's various cases, but the general principle is, if it's—
Is that for a grapevine?
Grapevine, yeah. It could be a grapevine, or there are other vines as well that produce fruits. It could even be like a part of a grafted tree. So there too, we would say that you follow the mother tree, meaning even though it looks like a brand new tree, we focus, again, going back to the point of the original intention. The original tree has already been planted for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So since it's permitted the original, even this other new vine looks new, it's still connected to the old. So now it's permitted to eat from it as if Orla has already been completed. The other Mishnayot. If you look at the second source, when our ancestors originally came to the land of Israel, right? We're talking about Egypt. When they came up from Egypt, Matsu Natua, they found plants that were already planted. Hold on, just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. So when they first came,
Okay.
so when they came to the land of Israel, Matsu Natua, they found planted trees. So the question is, do they have to figure out whether or not they were planted, more than 4 years ago, and the fruit therefore is permitted, or is it not permitted? If they already found planted trees, patur, they didn't have to worry about the mitzvah of Orla. The trees that were already planted, even if it was only 1 year, they could eat from right away. So apparently it has to do, again, with not just now even the time of planting, but let's sharpen the question, that they had to plant themselves. Not two, when they planted it, even though they hadn't yet conquered the land, chayav, they're obligated, meaning they have to wait the 3 to 4 years before they can begin to eat. And it's interesting because other mitzvot that have to do with agriculture usually become deraita, usually become obligatory only from the moment that we conquered the land. When we haven't yet conquered the land, the mitzvahs do not yet apply. But with Orla, the mitzvah does apply. And we see this again and again and again, that actually the mitzvah Orla very often applies in a more stringent fashion than other related mitzvahs like Shemitah or Kilayim and things along those lines. I'll give you just a few examples. Continuing with the Mishnah. Hanotea l'rabim. Let's say you plant for the public. In other words, your plantings are in the public domain. They're hefker, right? Anyone can take from them. So if you remember from previously, we had, with some of the other mitzvot, we said, for example, certain tithing. It's not obligatory to take tithes if the tree is hefker. It's for public use. Same thing with regards to peah. If you make your fields hefker, you don't have to do peah. Shemitah, we make everything hefker, but again, if you make things hefker for the public, so then the mitzvah doesn't apply. But here, notea l'rabim, if you make it hefker public, chayav, you're still obligated in Orla that you can't eat it, even if no one owns the tree. Rabbi Yehuda poter. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that idea. Anotea b'reshut rabim. That's the case I just mentioned. The previous case, was you plant in your property, but you allow anyone else to take it. The Reshut Rabim, you plant it in the public property. A non-Jew, a foreigner who plants, right? That's how we often get out of Shemitah, right? The Heter Mechira is you sell the land to a non-Jew, and therefore then Shemitah doesn't apply because it's the Rabbanan. Here, however, if a non-Jew plants trees, Gazlan Shenata, a thief that plants trees, if you plant on a boat, all of these instances, Chayav, you're obligated, you're not allowed to eat the fruit. So you see in all these instances where other mitzvot would not necessarily apply, Orla still nevertheless applies. Another example, which talks how you could see how it's more stringent, is if you jump down to Mishnah from Maser Sheni, chapter 5, number 1. So there, Kerem Revi'i, a vineyard in its 4th year. How would you know that it's in its 4th year? Let's say you're just walking the streets. I'm sorry, not that one. I want to look at something else for a moment. Okay, we'll come back to that. I apologize. Let's see what else I want to see. Orla is another example of this more stringency. It's more d'oraita than many other things. And so, for example, in order for a yovel to apply on a d'oraita level, the Rambam says, for example, all of Am Yisrael has to have returned to Eretz Yisrael. We have to have total sovereignty. We have to be here. Then yovel is applied d'oraita. Up until then, it's d'Rabbanan. Same with Shemitah. But with Orla, no. Orla applies already on a d'oraita level immediately. You don't have to wait. So it has there's in a sense, a greater stringency. It's a more serious mitzvah in that regard than some of the others. Another exception is Shemitah. You can get around it somewhat because there's a distinction between Ole Mitzrayim and Ole Bavel. When Jews left Egypt, that's the Ole Mitzrayim, and they conquered the land, that's much greater amount of land than those who returned from Babylonia. So by Shemitah, we follow the borders of the land are connected to them returning from Babylonia, such that if the land is outside of those borders, Shemitah doesn't apply. So a good example is in the Arava, in the desert down south, close to Eilat. So that's not included in the lands of Ole Bavel. Ole Bavel, they didn't control that land. So therefore, if you grow down there, Mina Torah, you're not violating Shemitah. However, with regards to Orla, no, Orla would also apply there. We follow the more stringent Ole Mitzrayim, which is a much larger piece of land. And so therefore, anywhere in that land, the Orla would apply. So if we say that we're much more strict in all these cases, why then, with regards to that very first statement, when it says, when we came to the land, if we found trees already planted, patur, it doesn't matter. You don't have, you're allowed to eat them right away, or that doesn't apply. With all these stringencies, you would think you come to the land and there's planted, you should be careful. Don't take a chance. The rabbis say, no, it's nothing to worry about if it was planted by the people who preceded you. Why is that? Again, it seems to be that there's planting is important, but also when you planted and who, in fact, planted. If we look down at the next Mishnah, well, the next Mishnah just explains how you count the years, the 3 or 4. Let's say you have a tree that was uprooted, and with it, all that soil right around its roots. If it got washed away by the river, if that tree, let's say that tree was already planted for 3 years, if that tree could live now with whatever roots it still has, and let's say it's already passed the Orla requirement, so it's now in the 4th year or the 5th year, so then patur, you can eat from it. It's as if Orla has passed. But in lav, if it's not going to be able to live on its own, you have to do something else in order to help it survive. So then chayav, you have to start over with Orla. The clock begins to tick again. The reason why I mentioned this is just as background to this next Mishnah. Ilan shenakar now you have a tree that is uprooted again. However, a small amount of its root is left behind, right? The tree is uprooted, but a small sliver of root remains. Patur, Orla doesn't apply. Even if, presumably, it would not be able to live on its own, because there's still some root in the place where it originally was, it's somehow patur. And how much root do you actually need? Rabban Gamliel explains in the name of Azar ben Yehuda, this individual from Ish me Bartrota, which is presumably a farming village. Kemachat shel mitun, there was a very small pin that when you would do fabrics, you would pull the fabrics tight. This small pin is enough. So so long as a little bit amount of root remained, then that was in fact sufficient. If the root survived, you don't have to start counting all over again. Now, at this point in time, there's no connection to the tree. The tree is left. You've taken the tree to another place altogether. It's not connected. It's not still connected to this little bit of root that remains as an original. Why should that matter? Now, part of the answer, I'm sure, is focusing on the importance of roots. There are many sources that connect. It says that a man is like a tree in the field. Right? There's a lot of times that's repeated in many different sources. And so perhaps there's a real and a symbolic connection that our roots, just as the roots of a tree cannot be seen, but that's where the life comes from. So similarly, maybe you can't see the roots of a human being, but there's depth going on in there. So perhaps we in a sense, celebrate the root, even though it's not connected, even if it's so small, because of its meaning to us symbolically. I would also point out there's a agricultural justification for this mitzvah as well. I don't know if you know this, but many trees that we have, many fruit trees that we have, they have a unique root stock. Its roots are different than the tree itself. Very often, if you go to like a nursery, you'll see cut down low at the very bottom of the tree, like a grafting that's taking place. What happens is you pick the type of tree that you want, let's say an apple tree, that's the fruit you want. But then there's various types of root stock. And some root stocks do better in different climates with different soils. Some are better against insects or disease. And so you pick out the root that will be best for the environment in which you're planning on growing. And then they will graft the apple tree to that root stock to allow it to grow much better. And there's different types of root stock. So on a physical level as well, the rabbis are focusing on the root. And they're saying the roots really make a difference in terms of the growth of that which comes above it. So perhaps there's some connection in that regard. That's why, by the way, grafting is so common, and it comes up all the times in terms of questioning, because a lot of trees are grafted for that reason. I think you can begin to get a little bit of the answer to these questions. Right? The questions that I'm asking is, why is the moment of planting what's so important? Why is Orla more strict than some of the other mitzvot, that it's on a deraita level in many respects? What's the significance of the roots beyond just the symbolism there? I think you begin to get a little bit of the taste by looking at the Mishnah that I alluded to before from Maser Sheni, chapter 5, number 1. So just to explain this on the outside first. You're walking in a field, you see a fruit tree. How do you know whether or not you can eat that fruit tree if it's maybe it's still Orla, maybe it's in the second year? So there was a custom of many farmers that they would mark it. A vineyard in its fourth year, they mark it with clods of earth and of Orla with potter clay. They would put a special mark so you could see. The Mishnah goes on and tells us other things that were marked to make sure that people didn't violate mitzvot prohibitions. So, for example, the graves. So a Kohen would know where people were buried. It wasn't always clear in a cemetery. Would be marked with lime that dissolved when it's poured on. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, when does this apply with regards to marking the Orla? Right? You want to make sure that you can eat from this tree. So he says it's only trees that have grown for 4 years in the Shemitah year. Right? Because in the Shemitah year, is the only time, if you'd be walking in a field, you would feel comfortable just to take the fruit from a tree, because it's not your tree. You're stealing from someone else's property. So you wouldn't think to actually take from there. But in the Shemitah year, you might actually think to do that because it's all hefker and you might do it. So you have to know whether or not it's permitted because of Orla or not. It raises an interesting question because it assumes that we don't care about a thief engaging in another violation. But let's put that question aside for a moment. Sorry. Oh. Not done.
I keep getting disconnected.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so if you want, I'll leave the phone on and you can hear?
Now let me try again. Okay.
If not, if it doesn't work, this will be taped and then I'll put it online.
Okay, but let me try again to get into the Zoom meeting.
Okay, it looks like you're in. So I'm going to continue. As I was saying, we get a little bit of hint of some of these by this Maaser Sheni, which I think is an interesting mission in and of itself for the reasons I've already.
I hear you.
Okay, good. So basically what I wanted to mention is I want to sort of give a little bit of beginning to the answer to some of the questions we've asked by looking at this Maaser Sheni Mishnah, but explaining sort of on a practical level how this would actually work out. So I said here that there was a question of what do you do when you're, in terms of marking a field of trees so people don't violate the mitzvah of Orla. And so as a practical matter, you didn't actually usually have to mark the trees, because what many people would do is as soon as the trees would, the flowers would bud, the farmers would actually take the flowers off if it was in the first 3 years. They would not allow it to even grow into a fruit, or if it began to grow into fruit, they would then take the fruits off. And there's obviously the function with regards to this Mishnah, so that there wouldn't be someone who would accidentally eat it and violate the mitzvah of Orla. But it was also a
Remember which tree?
I'm sorry?
Remember which tree?
I didn't hear you 100%. Something about which
How did they
tree?
remember which tree?
How do they remember? Well, when you plant the trees, you plant this whole row of new trees.
How did they remember which trees?
Well, you don't have to remember, because you plant a whole series of trees. If you're a farmer, you'd plant a whole row of trees in year 1, let's say. So you know that all those trees in that row are Orla and are forbidden to eat from until 4 years. You'd keep track of it. You'd keep track of your, the same way a businessman keeps track of his expenses and his properties. You keep track of the trees as you plant. And so what you would do is you would take out the fruit even before it grew into fruit. You take it out as the flowers. By the way, there's another benefit, as we're talking about the benefits of this mitzvah. There's another practical benefit, because in fact many farmers recommend that you do this anyway, because if you allow the fruits to grow on the first year, second year, third year, and we've already said that these fruits don't necessarily grow so beautifully anyway, but they sap the energy. They take a lot of energy from the nutrients from the ground and the sun, and take it away from the tree itself. And so as a practical matter, one of the things that's recommended is you take the flower buds off, so you don't waste any energy during those first 3 years. And then come the 4th year, when you allow the fruit to remain, they become much larger and much more numerous and much more abundant and plentiful. So here's also another practical benefit of that particular halacha. Now, I said that this is a hint. I'll explain why it's a hint in a little bit, but let's look at one more source and one more question, because I think the answer to this last question is really what helps us understand the entire mitzvah. So the Gemara in Kiddushin. The story is the question arises whether or not Orla applies in Chutz La'aretz, right? It's an interesting mitzvah. The mitzvah says when you come to this land and you plant a tree in this land. So you'd get the impression that it's only a mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael after you come into the land, because that's when the mitzvah starts. However, there are a number of people who felt differently. So reading the English, Rabbi Yehuda sent a question to Rabbi Yochanan concerning the halacha with regards to Orla outside of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan sent him the following response: conceal, do not publicize the halacha that produce whose Orla status is uncertain is permitted, right? You see where he's going. He's going to say that Orla, that's definitely Orla, right? You know for sure that it's in the second year. So for sure that's prohibited. But if it's a suffix, you're not sure, right? This goes back to your question. How do you know? So it's a question of doubt. We don't know if this has passed 4 years or not. So in case of a doubt outside of Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan seems to be admitting that it is permitted to eat. But he says, even though it's permitted to eat, don't tell anyone that. I don't want people to know that it's permitted to eat. Conceal this halacha. Do not publicize it. I'm sorry, you got kicked off again?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's leave it on the phone.
Okay, so you're on the phone still. And basically, I'm just reading now from the Gemara in Kedushin that says the mitzvah of Orla outside of the land of Israel is deraita when it's certain, and if it's a questionable, right? You're not sure if it's the second year or the third year, or the first year, or the fourth year. So the technical halacha is that it's permitted, but Rabbi Yochanan tells Rabbi Yehuda, don't let people know this. Don't publicize the halacha that Orla status, if it's uncertain, is permitted. Rather, destroy it, prohibit it entirely. Whatever produce there is in that regard, don't let people use it. Destroy it completely. And certainly, if the Orla status is certain, so then you certainly may not eat from it. With regard for the produce of those who are lenient in this halacha, declare that it requires internment and is prohibited to derive benefit from such produce. And then this is the line that I really want to focus on. Whoever says that there is no prohibition of Orla outside of Eretz Yisrael, you will have neither a child nor a grandchild. And then quotes a verse from Micha. So there's a few questions I have about this. So first of all, I told you, it seems very odd. The mitzvah of Orla is connected to entering the land of Eretz Yisrael and planting a tree. And now we're told, however, nevertheless, on a deraita level, Orla also applies outside of the land of Israel. That's an oddity, one. Two, the punishment, such an extreme punishment. Whoever says there's no prohibition of Orla outside of Israel, if you disagree on this particular issue, you have neither a child nor a grandchild. Rather than just saying the person's wrong, or some of the other traditional explanations, this person is chayav to get lashes because he's rebelling against rabbinic teaching. No, it goes to a whole nother level. It says you only have neither a child nor a grandchild. What's the connection? And thirdly, why say you have neither a child nor a grandchild, right? If you don't have a child, you're not going to have a grandchild. So what is the meaning of this Gemara and the curse that is offered there? So I want to suggest two answers to this last question. And the second answer will hopefully answer all our questions as well. The first answer to this particular Gemara, what's taking place here? Since they mention child and children and grandchildren at the end, it reminds me of another place where the mitzvah Orla seems quite relevant, and that is with regards to upshirin, right? And upshirin is when a child who enters his, right, he's turns 3, which means he's entering into his 4th year, has his hair cut off, and usually he's cut off in such a way that it reveals the payot, the payas that he has. Before, you didn't know where his payas were because his hair was just growing wild, so you had no idea where his payas were. But now you cut off, you clean up his hair, but you leave the payas. And many commentaries, of course, connect this to Orla because it's entering into the 4th year. It is prohibited to a certain extent. The hair is like off limits, but now you may in fact cut it. By the way, just interestingly, the word upscheren is German. It comes from Shirin, which means cutting, and Of, which means off. So it's like cutting off. So the upscheren is when you cut off the hair. Now, what's the symbolism of this and its connection to Orla? We've already said how a person is very often compared to a tree. So that's part of the idea, of course. But I want to just go from the point of view, sort of a more Kabbalistic response about people view Orla as sort of blockage. With regards to fruit, the Orla it's prohibited. You can't get at the fruit. You can't get at the energy that's been produced, that's behind the skin. You can't get to it. It's blocked off. It's prohibited to you. You have to restrain from it. So what does that mean with regards to a kid? Like, what's blocked off in this child until age 3? So the Kabbalists like to sort of look at the big picture. Creation, when the Torah tells us that God creates the world, it starts off with tohu vohu, total mass confusion. Physicists, astrophysicists would talk about the Big Bang and how the world just is expanding. It's tohu, complete chaos. It's getting further and further, less and less centered, no structure. It's going in every different direction. That's the tohu. But eventually the world of creating tohu, of confusion and chaos, becomes limited. God says, right, God becomes El Shaddai, the God that says enough. And when God limits the continued expansion of the universe and creates a structure. And so therefore the world of creation leaves the world of tohu and moves into the world of tikkun. God is beginning to structure the world and creating the world and creating planets and then creating human beings and creating animals and creating everything that we know, creating day and night and all these other things. So the world becomes now a world of creating tikkun, of correction. Now, before that, tohu symbolizes constant expansion, no limits, no structure. Tikkun is constructive, it's positive. This is the creation that we're trying to shoot for, and that's what we're trying to shoot for with children as well. When you meet a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, they have no understanding of their limit, right? They think the whole world is them, or they are the whole world. They have no sensitivity to other people's needs. It's whatever they want. I want. They can't imagine. You don't never see a 1-year-old say, I really want to cry now, but I don't want to disturb my parents, right? They have no sense of someone else out there or some responsibility to others. That's tohu, that's chaos. And the hair is symbolic of that constant expansion, right? There's no stopping it. With regards to the mitzvah of Nazir, when a Nazir lets his hair grow wild and without cutting it, Rav Hirsch says, this is like letting ideas grow wild, of having no restrictions, no limits on what comes out of your head, physically or also intellectually. So here it's perhaps the same idea with the child. The hair grows wildly, the child grows wildly. There's no limits. They can't appreciate that. But once they hit age 3, this is also the time, of course, where we begin to teach them Torah, right? You put a little sweetness on the Torah and teach them beginning about Shema, and you begin to have education. So education now is, on one hand, it's liberating them to even acquire more connections to the world. But on the other hand, it's also limiting them. It's saying not everything is you. Right? You have to be aware of other people's needs. And so you cut the hair, in a sense, to show them that there are limitations and there needs to be growth with structure, not just unbounded chaos. And so that's what cutting the hair is symbolic of. And of course, we leave the peyot, which many people let continue to grow. We've spoken about some of the beautiful reasons before about remembering the widow and the orphan, but here also I think there's a sort of a symbolic. You let the hair grow because you're still interested in that growth and expansion, but now it's part of a process that is more constructive and more educationally based. And the same is with the fruit. The Ramban that the Sefer Chinuch quoted, that I didn't quote directly yet, but if you look back at that first page, you'll see the Ramban says that not only is the fruit not good and delicious in year 1 and year 2, sometimes it's even bad. It could be bad for your health if there's too much fruit juices. So it could be even dangerous for the person at that level if it continues. It's sapping the energy. It's taking away from the tree. So we cut the flowers before they grow into fruit to allow it to grow better. It's the same thing with the child. We now cutting to allow the child symbolically to grow better. And this is wherever Orla appears. It's similar ideas. Orla also has to do with the Orla of your heart, right? You have to circumcise your heart. So you have to, right? You have to control your heart. Brit Milah is you remove the blockage and you allow for the potential, right? By entering that person into the covenant of the Jewish people, right? You go from no structure to the structure of a people. There's greater freedom when you're outside of the people, but there's greater purpose when you're inside of the people. So this idea, I think, might explain the Gemara. Why the Rabbi Yochanan says, those who don't admit that Orla is a mitzvah in Chutz La'aretz, they won't have the enjoyment of children. See, if you don't learn the lesson, and a child grows without any order, without the positive growth, without the structure, so that child, even though they're physically yours, you didn't pass along your values. That's also connected to the concept of a tree, right? We're told in Gan Eden that the bark of a tree used to taste like the fruit, right? Everything tasted the exact same. And the fruit of the tree would taste just like the tree. And then that changed after the sin. And one of the reasons why we say it Eitz Hadar in the Torah when it's describing the etrog, one of the reasons why it's called the Eitz Hadar, a beautiful tree, a precious tree, is because according to some, the etrog, which is the fruit of the tree, that's the one tree where the bark continues to remain and keep the taste just like the fruit. And Rav Kook says this is symbolic of when a child follows in the footsteps of their parents, when the fruit tastes just like the tree, the bark. That's what makes it Eitz Hadar. That's what makes also a child Hadar, when he follows in the footsteps of his parents. But this child, if you don't believe in Orla, if you don't believe in those ideas that we just mentioned, that the child shouldn't be structured and shouldn't be educated, and they never grow out of that idea that they're living just for themselves, right? So that child physically is yours, but they're not really becoming the child that you would want them to be, and so therefore they're not really your child. And they also, that's why he perhaps mentions grandchildren as well, because the child who grows up and only lives for himself and has no interest in joining a community, in creating relationships with other people, he's only self-centered the whole time. So that child also is not going to create something for the next generation. He has no interest in passing along anything to the next generation. And so that's why child and grandchild are mentioned in the Gemara. So that's one explanation of that Gemara, and I think it's a fair explanation. But the problem with it is that it's the opposite of our other questions. Right? The other questions had to do with why is everything focusing on the moment of planting? Why not at the moment of eating? Why, not other times? Why is planting seem to be such an essential element of this entire mitzvah? And here I said the mitzvah of Orla, in the Kabbalistic sense, focuses on the moment of the cutting, focuses on the 4th year. And that's logical, because that's when there's a change in status. So we understand why many people would want to focus on the 4th year when the fruit becomes permitted. But the halachot that we saw in the Mishnayot up until now don't focus on the 4th year. Don't focus on that moment that there's a change in status, but rather they focus on the 1st year, the very moment of planting, when you don't see any of the fruit. So what's the symbolism there, and how can we answer the question of the Gemara that says that if you say Orla doesn't apply in Chutz La'aretz, you could be punished with no children, no grandchildren, and the like. So I want to offer another suggestion, and that's this long midrash from Kedoshim, Siman 8. So I'm going to read through it relatively fast, but I think it does provide an answer to our questions. When you come into the land and plant, again, focusing on the word plant, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, even though you find it, the land full of bounty, right? There might already be trees there. You shall not say, let us settle down and not plant, right? Don't live off of the work of someone else. Already there's a meaningful lesson, right? You have to be self-sustaining. You have to work for yourself. Don't rest on someone else's laurels. Rather, be careful in planting, as it is stated, and plant any tree for food. Just as you came in and found planting, which others had planted, so you too shall plant for your children. So you see already a generational value here. Part of the reason why we're planting is a way of paying forward, right? It's a way of expressing gratitude to the people who planted before me, that I express thanks to them, but not to them, but rather to make sure that there is fruit for the next generation. It's a belief in the future. It's a hope in the future. And I think that's an important point that we're going to come back to again. Someone should not say, since I am old and tomorrow I shall die, why should I toil for others, right? I'm not going to benefit from them, so I'm going to die. So the Midrash saying, even if you're going to die, you should still plant. First of all, the Midrash goes on and says, maybe you won't die. And that's why it's hidden from every person the day of their death. Because if they knew the day of their death, they would know when to stop working, because they don't want any of their work to benefit someone else. So as a practical matter, but on a more important philosophical matter, you shouldn't say that. You should be happy to work, even if you personally don't benefit, if it's going to benefit humanity as a whole and it's going to benefit people in the future. So you should not say, why should I persist in toiling for others? The Holy One, blessed be he, therefore hid death, as I said, from human hearts, so that one would build and plant. That's why you should always be motivated to create and create and create. And that's what God hid from us the day of our death. If you will be worthy, okay, you'll benefit from it. And if not, it'll be for others. And then he tells the following story. There's a story about the Emperor Hadrian, that he's going to war and traveling with his troops to fight with a certain country for having rebelled against him. Now he found a certain old man who was planting a fig sapling. Hadrian said to him, right, this is similar to the story of Honi Hamagel, who was planting a carob tree. Supposedly it takes 70 years, and he's questioned, why are you planting a carob tree if you'll never see? And he says, well, just as it was here for when I entered into the world, I want it for others when they enter into the world. So it's a parallel story. Hadrian says to this man, you're an old man. Why are you persisting in taking the trouble to toil for others? He said to Hadrian, my Lord King, here I am planting. If I'm worthy, I shall eat of the fruit of my saplings. But if I'm not, my children will eat from it. He's thinking about the future and the benefit of others. Hadrian spent 3 years at war, and after these 3 years, he returned. What did the old man find? Well, what did the old man do during that time? He was still alive. He took a fruit basket, filled it with the first fruits of beautiful figs. Right, it's been 3 years. So now he's entering to the 4th year. He now has the Orla prohibition no longer applies. And he comes near to Hadrian. He said to him, my Lord King, take these figs, for I am the same old man whom you found when you were on your way. When you said you are old, why are you taking the trouble to toil for others? The Holy One, blessed be he, has already found me worthy to eat some of the fruits from my saplings. Now this fruit in the fruit basket is your portion from those saplings. Hadrian said to his servants, take it from him and fill it with gold coins. And so they did so. The old man took the fruit basket full of gold coins and began to go about his house. And he told his wife about what had happened. And his neighbor heard the story that he had gotten gold from the king by giving him a basket full of fruit. And then the neighbor's wife tells her husband, see, our neighbor honored the emperor with a fruit basket of figs. He filled it with gold coins from him. Now you get up and take a large basket and fill it with a variety of choice fruits, apples, figs, and everything else. All these beautiful fruit, since apparently the emperor loves these things. Go and honor him with them. Perhaps he'll fill it to gold with you, as he did our neighbor. So the husband went and did as his wife told him. He took a large basket, filled it with all these things, goes to Hadrian. I heard that you love fruit. I've come to honor you with figs and apples. The emperor said to the officers, take the basket and hit this man on his face. And they did so. They hit him on his face until his face swelled up. They stripped him naked, smashed his eyes, made an example of him. So he went home. One of whom an example had been made, crying. Now his wife thought that he was coming with a basket full of gold coins. When she saw him with the face swollen, his body shattered and beat, she said to him, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "When I heeded your advice and went to honor him, they hit me. If I had listened to you and put variety of hard food in the basket, they would have thrown it at me." And why is all this? In order to teach you that the evil woman destroy their husbands with evil counsel. Okay, it's getting into a little polemic that's not really of my interest at this point in time. Therefore, one should not cease from planting. This is the answer. The real motivation. You should never cease from planting. You should always continue to grow. Rather, just as he found, one should still continue to plant even though he is old, right? This man, the neighbor, who took fruit that had already been planted, already been produced, that's not what God wants. That's not to take that which is already, not only because it doesn't show a sense of your own personal hard work and industrious nature, but planting itself, when you're an old man, when the chances are against you of succeeding, that's the gift that this old man gave Hadrian the emperor. That's what we give to God when we plant. Every single time we plant a tree, we don't know if it's ever going to come about. We don't know if we'll be successful. And that's how the world is created. If you read the end of the Midrash, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, "Learn from me. Do what God does. Do I need fruits?" Right? God didn't need fruits. And yet, Bereshit says, and the Lord planted a garden of Eden in the east. God planted the Garden of Eden to teach a fundamental lesson about humanity. And I would say that there's many different levels of this, right? We spoke already about the industrial nature. There's also the concept of delayed gratification. Can you wait, 4 years before enjoying something? There's that famous marshmallow test where they would have a little kid sit in a room, and the student scientist would offer the child one marshmallow. But if they were to not eat it right away, if they would wait 5 minutes or 15 minutes, they'd get a second marshmallow. And they did this longitudinal study over many, many years, decades. And the children who were able to delay gratification and wait for the second marshmallow and not eat the first marshmallow, they did so much better in so many metrics of life, on test scores, on friendship and relationships, on health, all these different things. They did much better. But the ability to delay gratification is an essential part of success in life. So here with Orla, the restraint is required. Don't eat it right away. And that shows control. And that, of course, is connected to the concept of free will. And it's connected to the very nature of being a human being. What separates us from the animal is that we can wait, that we can, in fact, we might even say that the real sin that Adam and Eve engaged in the Garden of Eden is not that they ate from the tree, right? The Midrash says they were going to be permitted from eating from the tree. They just had to wait. And the fact that they couldn't wait, that was the real sin. They didn't have patience, because that made them more like the animals rather than the divine who can wait. God plants a garden to teach us that God can wait. So if God can wait, obviously all the more so that human beings should learn how to wait as well. So delayed gratification is another, and the control that it gives us and the free will is also important. I spoke about, always wanting to add more, do more. This is a very important point, especially spiritually speaking. You should never be satisfied with what you have spiritually. You should always want to add more. That's why I think all of the leaders in Judaism, Abraham and David, Moshe, they're shepherds, right? Physically, they're always walking. They're always going to find the next pasture. Spiritually, it's the same idea. You should always be spiritually wanting to get more and more and more. And I would sort of conclude by pointing out that's what faith is. Faith is believing that something you can't see is going to grow and become significant, that potential is going to be fulfilled. That's what really is taking place with the Orla. You plant the tree, not only you don't know if you're going to live to see it grow, you don't know if it's going to grow at all. But at that moment of planting, when it's just a sapling, it's nothing. you have faith that it's going to grow into something. So it's about developing emunah. It's also how you can connect to God, right? God you can't see, but it enables you to see the big picture, what is behind the scenes, things that you can't see, something that's taking place in the future you now can see when you plant or when you refrain yourselves from eating the orla. And similarly, it helps develop faith and belief in God. And that, I think, is the link when it talks about children and grandchildren, right? Because those are things you can't see. Or when your first child is first born, you look at it and you see the potential in that child. You don't see just the baby. You see everything that this child may eventually be able to do, and you want to help encourage it and nurture it. Faith also requires that partnership. And of course, that's why it also mentions grandchildren, I think, as well, because you're looking at something that you can't even see, something that you may not ever live to see, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the future. Not just physically we're talking about, but we're talking about when you're building Eretz Yisrael, and that's the connection to the land of Israel, of course. You can't necessarily see what's going to come from your contributions today, but you make the contributions nevertheless because you believe that even in 100 or 200 years after we're gone, that contribution is going to make an impact. And I think that's the ultimate answer to that Gemara that says that if you don't believe Orla applies to Chutz La'aretz, outside of the land of Israel, then it's a big problem. You see, because it's dafka the people who live outside of the land of Israel who need to develop this type of faith. You know, today it's happening, right? The verse says, when you enter the land of Israel. Well, that's happening a lot. Every day more people are coming to Israel. But 200 years ago, that was an impossible dream. 1,000 years ago, that it wasn't even a dream. You can't even conceive of it. What Orla is requesting of us is to believe that it's possible, to have faith that it's possible, and to actually plant in preparation of that possibility coming to literally fruition. And so therefore, it has to apply outside the land of Israel, because you have to be able to develop that faith as well. That was Yehuda Levi when he wrote about. You need patience. You need to have the delayed gratification. You need to have the vision. You need to have the emunah, the faith. And you sometimes may even need to be willing to give up some things in the interim. It's easier sometimes for the people outside of the land of Israel to assimilate, to give up some of their identity, because they'll be more successful, like the rest of the surrounding nation in which they find themselves. But you have to give that up. You have to restrain yourself from that in order to appreciate the harvest in year 4
Rabbi?
and beyond in Yerushalayim. That's it. That's the end of the talk.
Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you soon. All the best.